Welcome everyone to Raise the Roof. Today, our live broadcast, we're on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We are having a special show here with Leroy Hill, of course, the normal co-host, but we're joined by our atheist guest, the Fallen-Ape Theist, also known as Richard Suttles, to explore the question, can atheism give meaning to life? So to tackle this question, we're going to be using the first chapter from a book called Modern Ethics in 77 Arguments, a Stone Reader. This chapter was written by a guy named Todd May, an atheist scholar, and his chapter was titled The Meaningfulness of Life. Outside of today, our plan is to do a series of discussions in this titled Atheist Ethics in 7 Arguments. So there should be 7 of these episodes if all goes to plan. We plan to cover a range of issues from human dignity, happiness, truth, politics, and even the issue of immigration. So if you'd like to follow along and engage with us on a monthly live broadcast, you can find a link to our reading list. Each chapter in the book is also available still at the New York Times, where these articles were originally published. And so the show notes is going to have that. You can look at that directly through the podcast, or you can navigate to the site morethancake.org to find out more information. So with that in mind, let me bring in the guys. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. It's good to have you, Richard. Leroy, good to see you, at least half of you sometimes when you don't fade out of the camera. That's always nice. All right. Well, Richard, I want to welcome you, brother. First, this is your first time on the podcast. I'm going to have you introduce yourself, let people know who you are, a little bit about your history, how you devolved into an atheist from a theist. And I like that little Darwin play there. It's nice. And I'll let you do that. But first, I wanted to tell folks a little bit why I invited you to be a part of this series. And actually, you're part of the reason I was thinking about doing this series at all. I've seen you engage with a lot of other Christian folks. When I moved here to Arizona from San Diego in 2022, Richard had run across me on Facebook. I think it was Facebook at the time. And he offered hey, can I help you move into your house or something? And I was like, I don't know who this strange dude is on the internet, but I'm not telling him where I live. That was my sort of first thought, but he's definitely been around a few places since then. He's had a lot of great conversations with folks. So I said, okay, well, he doesn't know where I live, but he does know where I podcast. So that's going to work out pretty well. I also see he's got a good sense of humor. He also posts lots of fun things. So here, in case you're looking at our little logos here and you're watching this live, you got Leroy's little guy, my little guy, and I made that special one just for Richard, our Fallen-Ape Theist. Leroy thought that was kind of creepy looking for our logo, but here's some from his own X account. You can see he talks about no Jesus in his home, but he will do some Santa conversations. So that's always kind of nice. He is into some false myths, I guess you could say. He also made a recent point that was really good. And I want to make this point now is, even though we're looking at these atheist arguments, Richard is right to observe, as he did in this X post, there are different atheist worldviews. They're really a family of ideas. Atheism will talk about being a worldview, but it's really a family of worldviews. So he's not going to be here to defend exactly every point of Richard May, like say today, or any of the other people, but it's just our common springboard so that we can deal with these things and have a common frame of reference. And if people want to prepare and read along, at least they can see where we're coming from. And of course, then this was the inspiration for your logo specifically. Richard, you made this. Of course, you said atheists have baptisms too. So that's probably your view of yourself. I'm assuming that's a little joke there. Like I said, he has a good sense of humor. So I said, okay, I've got to take that. And then that was my inspiration for our thumbnail for the podcast and your little guy down below. So anyway, that's the whole idea behind Richard. So go ahead, introduce yourself to folks. Let them know who you are, what you're all about.
Hey, thank you, Joe. So yeah, my name is Richard Suttles. My stage name, the Fallen-Ape Theist. You can see me on Facebook. If you go to Twitter, I think my handle is @the-ape-theist. But type in that @the-ape-theist, or just go to Joe's page and look for his friends. I'm one of the people that follows him, and I think he follows me, unless he knows.
I do.
I was raised Southern Baptist. I'm still a Southern Baptist at heart, even though I'm not Christian. I still behave and act like a Southern Baptist. So, like, for instance,
Wait, is
I
that
got
the
a
part of the
job.
Southern Baptists when they were still segregationists, or is that the more recent one? I just want to know which one you align with. Just to clarify.
I just mean like super polite, trying to help. Like for instance,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
yeah,
All right.
just very genuinely trying to help and showing an interest in what other people do. I even got a job at Texas Baptist a few years ago, helping with security and logistics, not because I was an atheist, but because I walked into a church and there just wasn't enough men to do the men stuff, which I understood because I grew up at a church. So I just started helping. And Leighton Flowers was like, okay, you work for me now. And I did. I did for several years just to help with conferences, and not because he was trying to get an atheist to come to Jesus. There was just they needed a guy who could do those things. So I worked with Leighton and Eric Hernandez for many years doing that. So again, that's why I offered to help you move in. You're coming in new, and I'm like, hey neighbor, I can help. But of course, I didn't push, and I always understand if people say, well, I don't know you. Of course, I get that. But that's just kind of who I am by nature. I left Christianity just because I had a lot of questions and I didn't like how the answers. What would happen was that people would offer an answer and then they would assume that that covered it. But if it led to more questions, then they would say, "Well, what's wrong with you? What's really going on?" And I was in high school, so they would say, "Is it drugs? Is it women? What's going on?" Whereas I'm
Which
thinking,
was
well,
it?
this just right, exactly. It's got to be me, right? Um, I just got to the point where I said, I think that they just don't really know what to do with the questions. It could be me, but I noticed the pattern that was forming. So I left Christianity because I began to think that maybe Christianity was what people made of it rather than a real thing. I still think that. So I left him, I think between 17 and maybe 22 was when I was walking away bit by bit. And then maybe by 23, 24, I was out. I'm 55 now, and I still think that Christianity is what you make of it. So you could become a Christian and you can end up being a horrible person, or you can be an amazing person. And and I understand that when people become amazing and their life changes, they say it's all because of Jesus. It had nothing to do with me. I don't even push back on that. I'm like, okay, great. I'm just glad that you did it. And then if it goes the other way, if somebody becomes a Christian and they're more cage stage and they isolate themselves, then I might say, hey, maybe there's some things you're doing. Maybe there's some patterns you could change. But I don't push back if their life improves from Christianity. I just push back if they realize that they're isolating themselves. But then again, privately, I just think that it's whatever you do. It's your own conditions, your own actions kind of define who you are, whether you're Christian or not. And in fact, when I meet someone and they say they're Christian or Muslim or atheist, in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me. I'll know who you are in a minute as I start to figure out what your intellectual and moral standards are that kind of drive what you do. Then I'll know who you are. And that's been much more helpful to me rather than whether someone's a Christian or not. So that's just kind of a brief synopsis of who I am.
All right, good stuff, man. I just had a conversation with I was doing a lesson at a church last night teaching on incarnational apologetics and actually talked about that very issue of sort of two-dimensional apologists who have memorized a set of answers, and when they can't persuade somebody, their go-to is literally, well, there must be something broken in you, as opposed to realizing something is wrong. And so maybe down the road
Right.
I'll refer them to
Yeah,
this as an example of that. So
it's
yeah, Leroy,
I
jump
think
in.
what you're saying. I would say it's interesting. I was reading a book. Yeah, imagine that, reading a book. I was reading a book on called Pain and Grace, I think it's called, and they recounted the life of Newton, the slave trader who wrote Amazing Grace. And what they said was the story that they tell about Newton is that, once he became a Christian, he stopped slave trading. It's not Newton's story at all. Newton not only kept slave trading when he became a Christian, he kept slave trading for decades afterward, even holding Bible studies and reading scripture and leading Bible studies on the slave ships. And it wasn't till several years after he stopped doing that and he began to, I think, do a little bit more theological reflection about his actions that he came to the realization that how evil he was. And I think it's important because the writer of the book doesn't do so to denigrate Newton or to call Newton a hypocrite. he does so to make the argument that when people have sin in their lives, it creates a blind spot for them. And it's often difficult for them to see it as sin. And if you think of Newton in his times, slavery was normal. It was a good in some aspects of American society. It was a good, and so those people who saw it as a good couldn't help him out of that view. It wasn't until years later that he came out of that view and recognized his fault. And I think the problem that we have with people is that with people, we are way more gracious toward our own sin and not patient enough with other people's sin. So,
one thing I didn't bring up is that my whole career is in the last 31 years has been in the radicalization process. My specialty is how people become radicalized. And it happens just like what you said. You become blind to what your own faults are. You assume that you're morally and intellectually top shelf. And then you just think everybody else who doesn't agree with you is less than you. And at that point, it becomes easy to think about hurting other people or doing things that don't help them because they're not really people in your mind. That's what I really focus on. In fact, that's why I do this is to try to be an anti-terrorist, is to try to be the kind of
what's
person
really good about that point. What's really interesting about that point is there was a big debate on interracial marriage, and with two sides claiming that they were Christian, and not to get into it, but the guy who lost the debate, his name's Joe Webb, and I'll say his name, and he got handled soundly in that debate. When he responded to all the people who were saying he lost, they were dumb. He made the argument that 9 out of 10 people say I lost the debate, but the only people who were really intellectual and smart is the one person in 10 who agreed with him. So I mean, there's your point right there.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what goes on. Okay, well, hey, that's a great intro. That's a good idea of what kind of conversation we're hopefully going to have throughout this whole series, including today. So let's jump into our question of the day. Can atheists, like our good friend Richard, give meaning to life? So obviously there's lots of atheists have brilliant answers to this question. I found this trailer. My mind went back to this old 1983 Monty Python movie called The Meaning of Life. Now, this is probably not one of those brilliant answers, but it is certainly entertaining. So hopefully Richard does better than this.
Frank was just asking what's new. Yes.
Hey, look! How it's being eaten!
You see?
Makes you think, doesn't it?
I mean, what's it all about?
Face me.
Tired of questioning your own existence?
Not much happening at the moment, is there?
Now, in a special limited offer,
Don't stand there, Corbin! Like you've never seen Yandecock before!
the meaning of life can be yours. Yes, it's all here. In a new, unabridged translation by Monty Python.
I mean, what's it all about?
Philosophy.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Is that a sport? No, it's more of an attempt to construct a viable hypothesis to explain the meaning of life.
Including why you were born.
And what are you doing this morning? It's a birth. Wonderful what we can do nowadays.
What do I do?
Nothing, dear. You're not qualified.
Why things don't always work out.
The mill's closed. We're destitute. I've got no option but to sell you all for scientific experiments.
All right, so they go on, and there's quite a bit in that little clip. The little fishes watch the guy eat and talk about this meaning of life. But in our show, obviously, we're going to take a little more serious approach to that. We're going to look at this argument. It's the first argument in our series. It's actually our first chapter in the Modern Ethics in 77. In that book we mentioned, the Ethics in 77 Arguments. And the chapter is Meaningfulness of Life. And the author is Todd May. So here's my summary, as best I can give it. And then we'll jump in with Richard here and see what he thinks. But it's basically this. if May argues that Sartre was wrong, and by the way, I looked this up, and a bunch of French people, Sartre, and so I don't know, who cares? Sartre, who cares? I'm American. I'll say it the way I want. Anyway, so Sartre is wrong. It is possible to have meaning in life without God. So first, even if God existed, his plans are inaccessible to us, and grounding values in God's commands could not redeem the drudgery of life. That's his May's point. His second point for May is that if meaning comes from God, then atheists are left out in the cold because they would have no access to this meaning. Therefore, we must have a way of defining meaning that is outside religion and draws all people together. So he's trying to have this universal way that doesn't rely on that person of God. So taking his lead from a gal named Susan Wolf, May concludes that meaning comes over time as we discover what we value and what we value, okay? And these values are beyond moral declarations and are discovered through narrative, living out our life. Kind of a little bit what you were alluding to there earlier, Richard, too. It's, you don't want the labels, you want to see how people are living. So maybe that resonates with you or not. We'll see where you stand. So May quotes Jean-Paul Sartre, who believed that without God, our lives are devoid of meaning, in his essay, Existentialism. So here's what Sartre writes: if God does not exist, we find no value in commands to turn to which legitimize our conduct. So in the bright realm of values, we have no excuse behind us, nor justification before us. So this is kind of the question, Richard. Is meaning morally distinct from the morally good life? Can we make that distinction in some way? What say you?
And we're going to do another one of these on morality soon, right? Is that
yeah. Correct? So we're going to talk about happiness and morality in and of itself. This is just more the connection between meaning and at least this is what May's part of his argument is. He just seems to be saying, from the best I can understand, is that meaning is not in some ways it's derivative from them, but it's not directly connected in some way. At least that's the best I understand it.
Okay. Yeah, I have a lot to say about this, but the reason why I mentioned morality is that I take meaning and morality to be the exact same thing. Okay. So as we do these podcasts, you'll hear me repeat myself a lot when we get to morality. If you can imagine songbirds, you know how there's certain birds where the birds grow up and there's a community song and then they sing that song, and that song is what brings that community together. It's that song binds that community of birds. The funny thing is that when the birds are born, that song is already waiting for them. It's like this immaterial thing that's out there just waiting for them to get older till they learn the song from the other adults. And then they grow up to sing it. So it's this external thing it's already there. They grow up, but here's something. They are biologically compelled at birth to sing that song. So it's not just the song that's there and then they get brainwashed by the song. Their brain is already, actually, when they're born, their brain might not even be that developed yet. There's some potential there that says when you get to be the right age, you are going to embrace this song, and that's going to become who you are. It really is going to become who you are. The same thing happens with meaning and morality, whether God makes that happen or whether biology makes that happen. But it's the truth for everybody. You could be the atheist of atheists. You're going to have meaning in your life. Some atheists say, everything's meaningless, but even those atheists that say everything is meaningless, they keep trying to press me to believe it. They keep saying, well, this is really important. I want you to believe it. And I'm thinking, well, it seems really important to you. So I wonder if you really think everything is meaningless, if it's so important to you. Everybody has intellectual and moral standards that they think everybody else ought to take. And that's their valuing and that's their meaning system. That applies to every single human being on earth, no matter what. So I want to get that theme out there first. That's what I believe. So you're going to have meaning. And yeah, some people are going to hear your meaning and they're going to say, that's the dumbest meaning I've ever heard. There's no avoiding it. You can be a Christian. Atheists are going to tell you that. You can be a Buddhist and Hindus are going to tell you it's dumb. It doesn't matter. You're going to have it. It's going to drive you. And then you're going to have opponents because you have it.
Leroy, tell Richard why he's wrong.
I'm not. I think Richard makes a very interesting case. it was a kind of a case that I kind of anticipated, because I think it's the only really meaningful case that you can make, which is to argue for a determinist view. In other words, that, like with the birds he was talking about, I would say, it's so interesting. I watched the documentary last month on crows. I was cleaning the kitchen, had a TV on in the background, and someone was doing a documentary on crows and how crows use language in order to train their children, right? In order to train the baby crows to do what they need them to do. But again, if you take the determinist view, you're robbing those individuals of real meaning and significance and value. In other words, if you really are like a robot and meaning is predetermined for you, then that meaning itself has no meaning. It's just what you do. But if you try to take the perspective of saying that meaning is more than that, I mean, then you're venturing away from an atheistic perspective and more into a religious one, right? Why? Because meaning necessarily implies value. It necessarily implies evaluation. It necessarily implies comparison. It necessarily implies significant. And all three of those imply that one thing is better than another thing, right? And the moment that you get into that evaluative judgment from a purely determinist perspective, I mean, what's the difference than the waiter asking me, do I want salt or pepper on my steak? It's just what I prefer. It is not really a real topic that people who think that life has real meaning and real value can really have. It reminds me of, I was going to start out with my lesson from Batman. The Batman trilogy was amazing. You remember the Batman trilogy that just came out, particularly
Absolutely.
the one with Bane. The one with Bane, most people don't realize, is based on a play by the existentialist Albert Camus, which was called The Plague. And in The Plague, I hope that this doesn't go too long. If this goes too long, Joe, cut me off. In The Plague.
Okay, you're off, Leroy.
Okay, all right. In The Plague,
too soon.
Camus is really interesting because Camus was an atheist who became a deist before he died, accidentally. But in this play, what he shows is a plague surrounds the city. No one can leave the city and no one can enter the city. In that view, plague is demonstrating a closed system. There's nobody inside the system. There's nobody outside of the system. Only people inside of the system. Nobody can enter. Nobody can leave. And in the plague, there are all these various characters. One is an evil, Baptist preacher who is preaching hellfire and brimstone and just giving people no comfort. Another character are two doctors that are working feverishly to save people. Another character is a thief who was hiding from the law. And all of a sudden, once the plague was heavy, he was able to come out and enjoy life. And on and on. He demonstrates with these characters that if you only look at what is inside of the closed circle, then all of their meaning and value is equal. And what he points out is it takes something from outside of the circle, like the plague lessening, or in the case of Batman, like Batman entering back into the city, and we see that big emblazoned bat sign where people then began to have meaning for their lives. And this is the point. If this is a closed system and we're all determined in the system, then nobody's life has meaning. And I would make a distinction between what I would call temporal meaning, a meaning that we give to ourselves, and ultimate meaning. Ultimate meaning, meaning that in order for our lives to have meaning, there needs to be at least two things: immortality, someone to remember the deeds that we've done in this life forever, and a rememberer. I mean, I guess it would take someone to remember that our deeds have meaning in this life. And without those, I mean, at some point the sun is going to burn out. At some point, everything in the universe is going to suffer heat death. There's going to be no one to remember, and nothing will have meaning. So I guess that's how I would respond. I know that was kind of convoluted and all over the place, but yeah, that's how I would respond.
And I understood it. I've been having these conversations, I guess, since 1987. So I've met a lot of people and had a lot of these discussions. So I caught everything you said. Should I respond, Joe? Real quick,
Yeah. Jump back in. Do your best. Tell Leroy why he's wrong.
I just had a debate with Tim Stratton, if anybody knows Dr. Tim Stratton, he and I had a debate down at University of Miami in October, and he was talking about determinism too. And at the end of the debate, we had like a discussion, back and forth discussion, and I clarified I don't embrace determinism. When I talked about that immaterial song from the songbirds that's waiting on that little bird to grow up and sing it, that's going to have a huge influence on that bird's identity. But for humans, we've got many, many, many clouds. Case in point, my two daughters are high school daughters. There were a lot of clouds waiting on those kids to grow up. And so now they've embraced a lot of content, not just one particular songbird, song. So what I say is that those immaterial, moral, intellectual frameworks that are hovering above us, so to speak, they are waiting on our kids to grow up and to embrace them, but it's not guaranteed which one of them they're going to take. And not only that, we have some sense of creativity. So I could grow up in a community where everyone believes in a volcano god, and then I could come to believe that, maybe the trees have those qualities rather than a volcano. And then I just come up with my own thing. So I'm not determined to believe in the volcano god, but I might apply agency to something else and just say it's not the volcano. Maybe there's an eruption when we don't think there's going to be, or maybe we think there's going to be one and there's not. And so then I say, okay, it's actually the trees. And then the community changes over to mine, or we fight about it. So my argument isn't that we're determined. It's that there's a bunch of content waiting on us, and that content heavily influences us and our brains. And languages is another example. If Joe and I had been born in China, only listening to people speaking Mandarin, our brains would rewire differently than I'm in my 50s now, and Joe, you don't have to tell me where you are there, but our brains, my 55-year-old brain would be completely different because of the Mandarin that I had been exposed to and the worldviews that I had been exposed to. It didn't determine everything about me. It didn't determine whether or not I could have learned English. Didn't determine my worldview, but it heavily influenced me. So that's one distinction I want to make. I think that if anything, for all these 7 talks, I don't think that determinism is true. I just think that our surrounding conditions play a huge role in what we think, and that we're not consciously aware of how much it does.
So
I was going to. Let me
want to try
really quick, Joe.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I would agree with what you said in part. The frameworks that we live in are absolutely important, and the frameworks themselves are not determinative, but the frameworks themselves are influential. They're not neutral. We exist in at least 3 frameworks. One is a structural rationality, where the society in which we live in shapes and influences how we function in the world. The other framework that we live in is a rational. A pluralism where no ideas are ultimate. And then the other one, the third one, is we have a functional rationality. And that functional rationality is the way in which we choose to function within the world that we're living in. Now, the key point in all of those frameworks is those frameworks are set before we get here. But as you said, the frameworks themselves are not determinative. We get to choose how we function. And generally how people function, they're going to function one of 2 ways. That environment is going to shape them, and then they're going to start thinking ways that are not free. The environment isn't neutral. That's the one way. Another way is they're going to, as you said earlier, take those stories within themselves, and those stories will become determinative of how they're going to function within a set of guidelines that they grew up in. So what I'm not saying is that those frameworks are to be ignored, or those frameworks are not unimportant. They certainly are. But what I am saying is, if we are really going to say that the ultimate framework has no, that we live in a closed universe and there's nothing outside of that universe, and regardless of whether the individual believes that they're determined within that universe or not, if the universe is purely mechanistic, then they are determined regardless of whether they believe or not. All we would say is you are determined by the universe to not agree with that the universe is determined. That's all you can really conclude at that point.
Yeah. Here's my question, Richard.
Okay.
So you're saying it's not, at least what my question, trying to understand exactly what your view then is in this relationship between meaning and morality, because you're saying they're tied together. but it's not biologically determined, although there's certain things built in predispositions, I suppose you would say. I mean, right? There's certain biological things that are there, that are real, that affect us. But the other seems to be like selecting culture or the environment in some way, that whatever culture you're born into is going to shape that. And then you can choose within that. So are you saying that morality is that as long as you choose the one that what makes you happy or makes you feel a sense of meaning, is that then the morally good choice within those cultural ranges, as long as you're pursuing what? That's what I'm not getting from you. I don't understand what would be that connection between meaning and morality.
Yeah. Well, and the first thing I want to answer there is that I don't think we chase comfort. Some people do. Some people say, hey, leave me alone. I just want to get through life, or I just want pleasure. Some people do. But people like us, we chase meaning and fascination. That's what we chase. And we'll give up pleasure, and we'll give up things that could be good because we're really, really fascinated with this thing. So that some people decide early, hey man, leave me out of this. Give me my spouse, give me my kids, give me my job. I think most people do that. Even a lot of Christians do that. Leave me out of this. And for them, that's their fascination, which is leave me out of this. But then there's people like us who are like, no, what is intellectually and morally, what are really the right answers there for those standards? And atheists can do that just as much as religious people. In fact, even the atheists who say it's all subjective, there's no objective, even those guys, you ask them, how important is it for you that I believe you? And they're like, oh, it's everything. You got to believe me. So right there is your objectivity. So everybody who's in this game, in this worldview game that I like to call, in fact, your worldview, you have this great video, Joe, that's about an hour long about what is a worldview. I think you get into this too. If you're in the worldview game, you're going to have these moral standards, these intellectual standards that you think everybody else ought to appreciate. And once you're in that game, you're zealous for that. And you guys know, I'm sure the audience knows zealotry. We're all zealots once we're in that game. So to answer your question, if someone is saying, hey, just leave me out of this, I just want to get through life, sure. They're going to say, what's the answer that I got to give so that nobody bothers me, so that I can sit on my couch and watch Netflix and just get by? Sure. But for people like us, it's chasing that meaning. And that's why I say meaning and morality is the same thing, because once you really find those standards, those moral and intellectual standards, that becomes your framework. That's what drives you. That's why you get out of bed in the morning. And, I'm as much of a feverish Puritan as anybody else, because I'm just one of those people that I'm driven like that.
Yeah. So you seem to then be arguing, at least at this point, in line with what May would say. Because the next question, as I was reading through his stuff, is my question that came to me: is meaning distinct from a happy life? And his answer seems to be yes. He says this: for a life to be meaningful, it also must be worthwhile. Engagement in a life of tiddlywinks that's a game for all you kids that have never played. It's just a silly kids game from 100 years ago, whatever. Does not, so anyway, so a life of tiddlywinks does not rise to the level of a meaningful life, no matter how gripped one is, someone might be by that game. So he seems to be saying a little bit of what you're saying, Richard, that yeah, people can pursue happiness or pursue those other things, but meaning has to be in something worthwhile. But this is where I still get stuck, is who defines what's worthwhile. So for you, how do you define what's worthwhile? Because you're saying that nobody can have a standard that everybody else would be obligated to. So I could say, if I'm saying like May is that tiddlywinks isn't real meaning, what gives him the right to say that tiddlywinks playing that isn't meaningful? That's what I'm not getting. So help me out with that.
There's two things that I want to point out. Remember, one, I said that those cultures, those moral and intellectual standards of cultures, some of them are for TikTok, some of them are from Instagram, some of them are for your church, some are from your parents. All those songs hanging above us, waiting for our kids to grow up. That has a lot to do with what you finally determine what's going to be your meaning. And you are making choices. It's not as free as people think, because there's a lot of background analysis going on in the back of our minds that we're not consciously aware of. So that's one place that this meaning comes from, and who determines what's exactly meaning and what's not, what's trivial and what's meaningful. That's going to come in the back of our minds. A lot of it from these songs that I'm saying are hovering above us. But I also wanted to point out, when I talk about how the birds are growing up before they're singing a song, I remember I said that their brains already have this biological potential that says you are going to have a song in this part of your brain, maybe not physically in the exact region, but there's part of us that says you are going to grow up to have this moral and intellectual standard, and it's going to mean everything to you. That's going to happen to you. And maybe it's going to be leave me alone. Maybe it's going to be Islam. Maybe it's going to be Christian. Maybe it's going to be humanist for an atheist. Who knows what it's going to be? But before I was even aware of where I was, before I was even looking around for my mother, there was already a part of my biology and anatomy saying, Richard, you're going to have this moral and intellectual standard. This is going to be your meaning, and it's going to go right here in your brain. And at some point, that really happened. At some point, as I was developing, there really was this moral and intellectual standard. And it happens slowly, and it changes. So I think there's a biological potential that says you're going to be fascinated by this. This is going to be you. And then there's also this all these songs that will say that are waiting for you, that are competing for that space. And the reason why I think we have this, evolutionarily speaking, is that we can't live on our own. We have to bond with other people. We have to be part of a social network. So we're biologically compelled to have something in there. And then someone hears what you say and they reach out to you and they're like, dude, hey, how's it going? And then you have this network. So I have this great network right now in my life. And a lot of them are Christians just because of my moral and intellectual standards, because they find me dependable. They find me helpful to their cause. That helped me survive. The way that I'm like this has helped me survive. And so I just think that's a human thing. This biological potential to make something your meaning, which again is your moral and intellectual standards. And then these moral and intellectual songs that are already there waiting for us, pressing down on us, competing for that space. Those are the two sources, I think.
Leroy, jump in. What's your thoughts in response to that?
I can, like I said, I could see some of what he's saying. I think one of the questioners asked something about nurture versus nature. I would think of nurture versus nature in terms of this. Some people will grow up in impoverished situations and they will they will steal in order to solve their needs. Some people grow up in impoverished situations and they don't steal. Instead, they learn to work harder and they choose to overcome those situations, right? But this gets to the larger point. So nature does have something to say, and nurture has something to say, but neither one are determinative, right? I think that's the point, because, and I think this is kind of the issue that we're having, and I think Richard's points. I want to say that I appreciate that how careful you're attempting to be with these, and you are. I mean, I want to say that I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this guy, he's been thinking about these issues a little bit. But I think the one thing that we need to disentangle is, morality and meaning. I mean, there's some overlap, but they're not the same. I mean, morality tells us like what's right or wrong, and what's my life for, right? I'm sorry, what's right or wrong, and what should I do? While meaning tells me, does my life matter, or how should it matter, and what's my life for? I mean, those are like two different things. And one way I like to think about it is, if they are the same, then why do we have two different words if the semantic range is identical, right? The semantic range isn't identical. Of course, there may be some overlap, but the two can't be collapsed into each other, because think of it this way. I talked about the person who grew up in an impoverished situation and he pursues a life of crime, and the person who grew up in an impoverished situation and they pursue excellence and hard work. I mean, what would be the difference in those outcomes? Neither. There's no difference in their outcomes. It's just what they choose, or some would say it's just what they were forced into. I mean, neither is really free to choose how they're going to respond. I think if Richard's point is to carry it out to its logical conclusion, which means that, I mean, and not to be inflammatory, I mean, there's really no difference between the person who becomes a serial killer and the person who becomes, Mother Teresa on that view, because, they're forced into it because of the frameworks that they grew into and their particular internal disposition. I don't know how you could, separate the long-term conclusion from those two. And I know that's not what you're arguing. I would never, I mean, like I said, I know that that's not what you're arguing. I want to make sure I say that. I think that's the conclusion, though, that a reasonable person can take, that really there's no difference, in outcomes. It's just, how your environment and your internal disposition, kind of led you.
Yeah, this is interesting, Richard, because as I'm trying to listen to how you frame it, I do think there's a lot of parallels. I don't know if you felt you resonate with May's argument, if that kind of summarizes a lot of where you're at. But I had this here's this quote I had written down. It says, May says that the pursuit of this core idea, that is a meaningful life, is both valued and valuable, allowing us to understand several important aspects of our attitude towards ourselves and others. In short, each life is a story, and how it is told over time is the way it makes us feel, is what gives it meaning. So he seems to be saying that morality and happiness are discovered really in the pursuit of meaning, of doing something that you deem as worthwhile. So he's not going to separate, as Leroy says, as necessary morality or even the concept of happiness from this pursuit of something worthwhile. But even those aren't really defined. We don't even really know what they are until you pursue them and you spend a lifetime searching after them. And it's the journey, not the end, so to speak, as we've seen a lot of movies. It's that sort of bumper sticker phrase there that May seems to say is his view on that. Is that where you're really arguing from? Is that what you're saying? It's the journey that we pick, and it doesn't matter what journey we pick as long as we pursue it with gusto and enthusiasm. That's going to determine our moral good and our happiness. Is that kind of where you're at?
I'm actually pretty conservative. Sometimes I'm even more conservative than my Christian peers. I was raised on Thomas Sowell. I know you guys know what Thomas Sowell is. I was about to say, I don't know if you know. I mean that to your listeners because I know the two of you could probably reach behind you and pick out conflict divisions. I was raised on that. And Thomas Sowell isn't a Christian, but he's like, there's standards and you've got to go by those standards or you're going to fall apart. And I absolutely believe that too. I was going to say to my soul, that's how Southern Baptist I am. You got to have standards. I like to say that we're not just selfish. So we're actually, there's three things that drive us, some more than others, but we do have self-interest, a biological interest in being self-interested. We also have a sense of cooperation. We might not listen to it, but you see somebody that needs help crossing the street, you're compelled to go help them. Sometimes you can outweigh that. You can have enough conditions to where you say, I don't care about that person anymore, or I don't care about anybody. So that compulsion to help others can fade. And then the third thing is our zealotry. And that's what I was saying, this meaning system that has your moral and intellectual frameworks. When you go down the meaning road, your zealotry outweighs your individual self-interest. And when you go down that road, happiness is boring. If someone could tell, in fact, I would bet for the three of us, if someone were to come up to our door and say, hey, look, we got $10 million for you. All you got to do is just take your family and just go live in an apartment, nice apartment, but you just can't really talk about yourself anymore. Just, take care of your family, but you stay out of it and just, take up tiddlywinks or watch Batman or whatever. We wouldn't do it for $10 million because we're not thinking about happiness. It's boring. We're thinking about our meaning system. So when I think about meaning, I think about this zealotry that we're chasing, and we do chase it. And your zealotry is made up of these moral standards and these intellectual standards. And it's true, I'll take a shortcut and say morality and meaning is the same thing. But what I'm saying is that we're chasing this other thing that sometimes opposes our individual self-interest, and we don't care because that's what drives us. And I think that's biological. I don't think that that's necessarily, it could be. I'm not writing out the fact that this is God outside the universe calling me to do it. I think it's something that humans are compelled to do, and it helps you bond with other people. And then when you do bond, you're more likely to survive. So and you can say that's a selfish interest, is just surviving, but it still means something to me to be zealous, even if underneath it all is just survival. I'm okay with it. But it doesn't bother me if
I would say, do you think that comes from your Southern Baptist upbringing, though? I mean, imagine if you were in, some remote, place. Would you have the same value?
Oh, no. I think your surrounding conditions play a huge role in all of those decisions about what's going to be self-interest, what's going to be cooperative, what's going to be your zealotry. Your surrounding conditions play a huge role in all of that.
And would you also say that those surrounding conditions either come closer to the human flourishing that you desire, or go farther away from it?
Well, and I have different understandings of flourishing. There's the kind of society that I think is ideal, which would be like Walnut Grove in Little House on the Prairie. And I understand that was a fictional show, but I think it's a fairly realistic ideal to have the community where everyone has their family and everyone's watching out for each other and everyone's honest. I think that's flourishing. And I understand that the Nazis could have flourished if they had taken over the world, and then there would just be several people who just are flourishing like nobody's business because they got everything they want. Yeah. That's a different kind of flourishing that I don't like. Go ahead.
That's good insight. I was going there, but it's good insight because, but that's really the point that we're having here. I mean, I think we're talking about the story inside, a Christian worldview. I think that's the discussion we're having, that the framework of a Christian worldview is guiding, the discussion that we're having. But the real framework that we need to have is one that is not outside, that is not the Christian worldview, but one that's decidedly outside of it. I mean, and this is where, as much as we argue against William Lane Craig, I think I may have stopped. I think I'm for.
Oh, you're good.
As much as we argue against William Lane Craig, this is the one value. I mean, the one value that Craig has is he's gonna force us to start looking at things from a different framework, and then ask the same questions within that framework. And he's gonna force us to choose, say which one conforms, to reality, to the kind of human. And the reason why I use term flourishing is not an ultimate good, but one that I know that you and I could agree on, that humans ought to flourish. But what do we say about those people who don't believe that humans ought to flourish, like the Fabian Society? Some of the most intellectual people who've ever lived on the face of the planet, but certainly believed that a lot of people had to die, in order for the rest of us to flourish. I mean, we couldn't really make a distinguish our arguments from theirs. I mean, on that view, if we step outside of the Christian worldview.
This is what I think is interesting, Richard. I think what Leroy's pointing out, something I was kind of writing some notes here, thoughts to myself, is I think from my perspective, what you've really done that is you're making it appeal to the Christian worldview as normative, but you're just saying it's not Christian, it's biological, so sociological, environmental, and you're saying it just happens naturally within the natural world. But the real problem with that is, again, that's not everybody's world or worldview. And it breaks down when you leave the West. And you know that probably better than any of us here, because you study, you've done more traveling, and you do more with radicalized, groups across the world. And, we can say, thinking, caring of others. And I show my students a stat that you can go to certain countries and you have 75% of women who say, yes, it is acceptable for the husband to beat his wife at some point if she is disrespectful in some way. And that's the women saying, this is totally okay. You can go to the ancient Hebrew worldview, and when you have this polytheistic versus a monotheistic worldview, and if it's my God is better than your God, then if my God beat up your God in the myth we tell each other, then I have the right to conquer your people, to enslave your people. And this made them satisfied. Fulfillment was conquering, enslaving and killing and butchering and taking. Those societies found that quite satisfying and fulfilling and morally good and just because it was in the life of their stories. So the challenge for what you're saying is it works well if we all have the same worldview. Hey, we all have the same thing. Why can't we're just appealing to a different source. You're saying God, I'm saying nature. Let's all just get along. But that's not the world as it is. That view that you have breaks down. So here's the situation. If I'm looking at the world and I see a society that has embraced that sort of more selfish side of thing, or the smaller minority feels they have the right to oppress the majority of people, your worldview doesn't seem to give me any framework to say that's actually wrong, or to actually want to bring about change. I should just say, well, that's the song that's in their environment, and they're born and they pick that song. More power to them, but I have nothing to say about it. Because as long as I can live my life the way I want to, I'm fine. And I don't know, that seems unsatisfactory to me, to live in that kind of reality where we don't speak to the actual moral good of other civilizations, where we see brutality, slavery, those sorts of things. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is why I get up every morning. In my mind, we're all in a competition of ideas, and the cloud of ideas that wins is gonna win. And if it's something horrific, like in those cultures, and I've been to countries where not only do the women think it's okay for the husband to beat them and their daughters, they would be disappointed in me to hear that I never beat my daughters, and that I'm not going to decide who they get married to. They would think that's wrong. They would feel a repulsion. That's how ingrained that cloud of ideas has affected their brain. I'm saying we're in a fight for what kind of world we're going to live in. And so I get up every day and push this idea. I spend a lot of my time trying to bring some Christians back, because Twitter has caused some of my Christian friends to be more brutal and horrific. I've known some of these guys. I'm watching some of my, I'll say friends, people I've known for 7 or 8 years, saying things they would have hated 7 years ago, because that Twitter cloud is heavily affecting how they think and what they see as righteous right now. So in my mind, we're in this competition of ideas, and I'm pushing for this Walnut Grove kind of existence, whereas some other people are pushing for something like, no, we'll say it this way. All these other people don't get a say. We'll decide they need to shut up because they're demons. And I'm pushing more for this Walnut Grove kind of thing. It's a competition, and I could lose. And if I lose, then I'll feel like I let people down. I don't think anybody's paying attention. I don't think there's a God watching saying, this is right, these guys are wrong, and one day they'll all see. I think that's false. So that means I've got to fight, because if I lose, then it's over. There's no.
So what's over is your
arbitrary.
preferred way of living, though, right? Is that what I
Yes,
hear you saying?
yes.
It's not that it's
Yeah,
over
it's a
like in a
competition.
morally bad sense. It's just over in the way that you'd prefer to live life a
That I see
certain
it.
way, and if you don't get to live it your
Right.
way, then that would be bad for you. So to keep your
That's absolutely right.
vision of
Yeah,
whatever it
and
is, you advocate for those changes, but not because you think what they're doing is wrong necessarily per se. It's just
I think
it
it's wrong,
would be
but
bad for you. Well, how would you say
I
it's
think it would be
wrong,
bad
though?
for everybody. Well, I
Well,
would
they
think
think
it'd
it's to
be
be
bad
great.
for everybody. Yeah. So I think it'd be wrong for everybody else. And I understand that other people would have different views, but remember, I'm saying it's a competition among us. It's a battlefield, and just like a regular battlefield, the victor is going to be the one who's left standing. So for me, I have to fight, because if I lose, it's over. And somebody might say, well, so what? For me, it matters. And I understand that that's just me, I'm not appealing to some higher arbiter. But here's the interesting thing. If there really is this higher arbiter who's paying attention and who has the actual objective moral and meaning, it won't change anything. We're going to keep doing whatever we're going to do. So what I'm saying is still going to happen. We're still going to have this battle of ideas, and the victor is going to emerge victorious. And then maybe one day when we all die, then that arbiter is going to say, you guys were wrong and you guys were right. Maybe, but it won't change a thing on earth right now. And if we're going to affect earth right now, we got to have this battle of ideas. And that's why I get up in the morning.
That's an interesting take. First of all, let me say, you can come to move next to me. I mean, I get
Okay.
what you're saying. I mean that. I get what you're saying.
Thank you.
When I start thinking of my grandkids and the world that we're leaving them, right?
Mhm.
I get passionate about it because it matters. It matters to me the kind of world that we leave them. It matters to me the kind of country that they grow up in. I mean, and I didn't always have that view, but that began to be intense as I started to see how the world was being shaped and warped against their very existence because of what they look like. And
Right.
that really began to bother. So I mean, I can resonate with you on that level. But if all of us are going to become a part of the universe's furniture at some point, what does it matter? If all of us are going to die, and what does it matter? What does that fight meaning? So what I would say is, while I think I do agree that I agree with the passion, your desire to fight that fight, throwing punches, right? I'm just that kind. Um, I think, I mean, in regards to Pascal's wager, I have more reason to fight that fight than you do, and with more zealousness than you do, and with more graciousness and more goodness than you do, because I think that at the very end of this life, regardless of what happens, regardless of whether this fight is lost for me, in my time, or whether it's lost in the future, I think that at the very end of it, there is, and I'm not doing this for the reward, but there is a reward at the very end of this. And that reward is that I've served the God, who created me, that I've, as my friend said years ago, I mean, I may not have won the fight, but I got some licks in. You know what I mean? I got some licks
Right.
in, got some punches in. And that, to me, I mean, if there's nothing that awaits me other than, to become a part of the universe's furniture, another dust ball in the universe, what's the point, really, ultimately? I mean, and I think, but I would say, and I don't say that to belittle at all. You're going to get 100 amens from me on the very
I'll take it.
need to fight. And then I would also say, yeah, I would take it. I mean, and I would also say that I think that, in listening to you, it's not in my nature to be sensitive to a lot of people. It's just not. I want to treat ideas like, these are just these are just bullets we throw. I can resonate with you when you talk about Twitter. Marshall McLuhan said in 1967, the medium is the message. We are on these mediums. The medium is 140 characters, 160 characters. You never can really say everything that you mean. People can't see your facial expressions. And it necessarily, even in our best intentions, leads to dehumanization. It just does.
Yep.
Because, there's so much lost in that particular medium. So those mediums necessarily lead to dehumanization, and maybe even unintentionally, because the whole point of all of them is to bring us together, but they necessarily lead there. But if there's nothing that separates my desire to be good and to love people and to care for people from those people whose desire is to be pernicious, insidious, and evil, if nothing differentiates it at the very end other than mere preference, I mean, I still come back to, what's the point? What's the point of it? They are living out the dictates of their life with the same passion and the same zeal that I am. And they're going to end up with the same fruits and the same rewards at the end of it, regardless of how it ends, as I am. There's no point to it, ultimately.
Yeah,
Can I push back on
Oh,
this?
yeah. Go for it.
On this, no point to it. What if this is for both of you? What if somehow you came to believe that there was no God? Would you stop taking care of your family? Would you give up and just check out of life? How would you respond to that?
If I honestly believe that there was no God, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you, it would really mean if I didn't believe that I'm living this life under someone else's dictates. And I'm saying, why? I would ask, why should I? What would be the point of me living under someone else's dictates on this earth? Because they're no different than me, other than the fact that they have more power than I do. They don't have more meaning for their life than mine. I should live this life for the thing that satisfies me most, if there is no God. And whatever that is, if it's beating up people, if it's robbing people, if it's doing good to people, it doesn't matter, because that's really the logical conclusion of it all. But if there is a God at the end of it, to whom I will stand in judgment before, then that really tells me how I ought to live now. I'd be wise to live now in that way. And this was like the point I was talking about Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager is not a small thing. Pascal is saying, he's saying this: if I live this life and I live it with gusto and passion for the Lord, and at the end of it, I die and there's nothing waited for me, I have not lost a thing, because I've lived this life for what I really want. But if I live this life with all this gusto and passion for the Lord, and there is a God at the end of it, it isn't me who loses. I win either way, because I've lived for what I really wanted the whole time. It's the person who doesn't believe that who ultimately loses. So Pascal says, you'd be better off to wager that God exists. That's his whole argument. It isn't, a leap in the dark. He's saying, live this life for if you live this life for what you really want, and what you really want is God, then you're not a loser for living this life, and there is no God at the end of it. You get exactly what the atheist gets. I mean, that's the result.
I'd come down where Leroy does, to be honest. I think I'd live the way I live. I think I'd still love my kids. I'd love my wife as long as it was working for me. Mm-hmm. And when it's not convenient, or when something better comes along, or when life gets difficult, why persevere when I could take an easier path? And I think it's probably in me to do that. I think that there has been constraints on my life that I've looked at this and I've reached out to God. God, what is the right thing to do here? Not what's the morally good thing, not the easy thing or the convenient or the selfish thing. You talk about that nature between choosing the selfish or the benevolent sort of choices we make, and you ascribe it to, the biology or the culture. But the reality is, if that's all that we're deciding is it's no really moral good or bad choice, then I'm going to prefer the selfish things at the times when life is difficult. And the fact is, human history is evidence that that's actually the vast majority. You can argue from one person's experience or yours or, a handful of people that, well, I would still live the same life. But the evidence from the billions of people who've lived is that's not the way humans choose to live. That's not the story of humanity. And I think that what Christianity does and what God does is he does give that, just like you appeal to something beyond the deterministic sense of biology, there's something external, the culture, but the culture shifts and changes. But if there is a transcendent truth and reality, of course, that's going to stabilize all those things. And I think here's one bit of evidence that I give for making this point. There is, from 2016, there was a Harvard professor, this is published in USA Today. The title was "Religion May Be a Miracle Drug." And he's talking about the power of community to deal with some of these things we're talking about. But it's not just any kind of community. It's funny because this week I got this email from my garage door opener company. And they said, join the MyQ community. I'm a customer. I am not a part of a community. Everybody wants community. It's the LGBTQ community. It's the baseball community. It's the whatever community. Because we realize there's a need for something outside of ourselves. But the question is, over time and over studies, what actually gives us collectively that meaning? So if I had a conversation with a girl a couple of years ago, and I'll get to my study here in a second, but if I had a conversation with a girl years ago who was talking with a roommate who was being abused by her boyfriend, and I say, well, did she think that she deserves better? Well, she struggles with that. She's not sure if she does. She's done things in her own life, and maybe this is the best she could have. She wants to be loved, and maybe this is all she gets. But even if I could convince her that she did deserve to be treated better, what would she say to the boyfriend who thinks she doesn't? Right? No, you're getting treated the way you should be treated. There has to be something outside of her that can actually persuade. And you say we're in this argument to persuade other people of this story, but you're arguing with Christians who agree about the story. But the problem is when people don't agree with that story, don't agree with the value set, there's nothing external to you personally as the Fallen-Ape Theist to appeal to except, okay, we're going to go to blows over this. We're going to go to war over these things. Because when you have no common framework, all that's left is violence. And that's the zealotry of violence is the only way to enforce your moral system that you believe is better for the world. And so this study said this: if one could conceive of a single elixir or to improve the physical and mental health of millions of Americans at no personal cost, what value would our society place on it? Going a step further, if research quite conclusively showed that when consumed just once a week, this concoction would reduce morbidity by 20 to 30% over a 15-year period, how urgently would we want to make it publicly available? The good news is that this miracle drug, religion, and more specifically, regular church attendance, is already in reach of most Americans. In fact, there's a good chance it's just a short drive away. Now, Andrew, in our comments earlier, asked if there's the religion relationship thing. I think it's a false dichotomy. I think they both go together. this kind of religion he's talking about is built into, tied to a community, that they do have those shared values, which you talk about, Richard, which we agree are true, but they appeal to a transcendent reality that we can then hold each other to accountable. And the only way to have real meaning in relationship with people is that if we have that shared thing. That's and my last point I'm making this, and I'll clip it to you, and then Leroy, and we'll start to wrap up with maybe a final thought or two or questions, because I don't want to go too past our time here. But got the chance a couple years ago. I was in England, got to sit down at Cambridge, and got to hear Tom Holland, the atheist thinker who wrote the book Dominion. There's my front row seat, getting to hang out with Tom Holland, and had a great conversation. It's actually, he's at the time said this is probably the longest talk he'd ever given, and it was a fairly small group in this local church, and got to engage and have a good conversation. Talk to him a little bit afterwards. But his book, for those that haven't read it, he talks about the value of the individual, human rights and dignity, the abolition of slavery and care of the poor. All of those are Christian worldview realities. Learning, the value of learning and literacy to the masses, the purpose, the significance, the value of scientific study, beauty and art, architecture, music, the role of law that we've talked a little bit about, morality, above the kings. Like there's a law and a moral system above a king. Think of the Magna Carta, the Constitution. The ability to say the king doesn't determine it, we the people kind of do. All those are a Christian worldview thing. And so I do think you're making strong and good appeals to why the Christian worldview matters. You're just saying you think it can matter without the Christ, without the God. And I think that's where eventually, in my view, it would fall to pieces. And I think the evidence, through scientific data, observation, world history, ancient history, kind of play that out, that it just doesn't end up working. So, anyway, Leroy and I both gave our answer to your question. What do you say? Richard, I lost you.
Oh, you know what? I thought I took it off mute, but I put it on mute. I was going to say I was in the Marines, and if I had to pick a group of 20 guys, and you guys were on my team, and you said that it had to be that the God has to exist in order for you to perform at the level that you're performing now, God had to exist. I would say, well, by God, he existed. And I'd make sure you guys got your church. And I'm not saying, hey, there's no objective reality, because there is. But I would know that your network, your surrounding conditions would require encouragement that God exists. And if he does exist, it makes my job even easier. But for me, that would be mandatory for me, because it's a big part of how you do what you're going to do. And I don't say that condescendingly, because you're doing it. I've met so many atheists that say, I'm good without God, but then what have you done? Show me some of your goodness. And they're just addicted to saying that. They're not actually showing me anything helpful to their community or any particular love for their family. So I really mean that. If you're actually doing it, in fact, that's how I see everybody. I see what you're actually doing, and then I work backwards from there. And if you say, hey, I needed God to be here, great. Now, I've met people who became good because they said they felt oppressed by their church surroundings, or they felt harmed by their church surroundings, and they felt like they broke free from that, and then they were able to fall in love with their family and be helpful. Same thing. If that's what got them there, I'm just happy that they're there. So I kind of work backwards. I understand that philosophically and metaphysically, there's got to be something underneath to kind of gird all of this. I just don't know if it's God. And if it is God, he doesn't seem to intervene. So these battles go on. So then in my mind, I'm like, okay, if you're there, I'll find out eventually. In the meantime, I've got a limited amount of time to fight these battles. So I fight these battles, and I'm less concerned with whether God is behind it than what the warriors that I'm working with now, what are they about? What are they fighting for? And can I get my Walnut Grove?
No, there could be music there too. It's all right, because it doesn't have to be a dance-free community. Walnut Grove.
Yeah, take your pick. But so that that's my thing, and it could be self-interest, and it could just be my own way versus their way. But hey, remember, I'm saying every idea for itself. And then the last thing I want to say is that I agree that ideas should transcend people. And that's, if we could get that going, that would take care of a lot of our politics and a lot of our arguments. There are so many people who cannot criticize somebody because of who they are, or they can't give someone credit before they are. They tie them to a label or something, and they're like, no matter what he does, he's got to be awful, or no matter what he does, he's got to be amazing, because they can't take the idea above the person and then make that person earn his condemnation or his praise every day. Make him wake up every morning and earn whether he gets critiqued or whether he gets praised based on his behavior. We're horrible at that. Our nation is horrible at that. So I agree, this idea about the Magna Carta and things about ideas transcending people and kings. Thomas Sowell taught that too in Conflict of Vision. You got to have your standards. You got to make it about ideas. And then if people want to represent that, they got to hold up to it. They can't let the status of an icon or the success of a group cover them from not getting criticized when they fall short. So that's the last point I want to make.
So it looks like Leroy got angry at you and just rage quit, which is totally him. Oh man, all the times he's rage quit, I had a nickel. I wouldn't have any money, but anyway, it's funny to say that. All right, well, let me do this. I was going to ask you this question anyway before I brought him in. Andrew has been watching, and I'll go ahead and read the question because it's kind of small on the screen there. But he's really been paying attention. He's had quite a few questions for you along the way. But he asked you this, Richard. He said, if you don't believe in any afterlife, would it not be a lose-lose situation? If it's not, then isn't that the ego speaking, which is solely our own perception? Regardless of whether we have been swayed by external influences or factors, if you and I are powerful enough, would we not be able to claim the victory of the world's evil, which comes from humans, since we are the fallen species in the beginning? So I'll let you. Does that make sense? What he's asking? Do you have a thought for Andrew, who's been kind of following this conversation? Oh, you're muted again.
Yeah, I hit the mute so as not to make any stray noise, interrupt you. And
Richard is a fallen-ape theist, and monkeys can't use mute buttons. So.
That's right.
I'm sorry, I can't resist
even,
that, brother.
The monkey can't even press the right button. And I call myself the fallen ape theist because I believe we're fallen. I believe we're all fallen, but I tie that to like a Greek idea that even precedes Christianity, which is that we can visualize ourselves being better. And even with that vision and recognizing that we're not there, we still have trouble reaching it. And I'll even go so far as to say we can't do it alone. We need other people. And so maybe we need God, fine, but we need other things. I can't just reason myself into being the best I could be. There's got to be others to hold me accountable. So that's why I say we're all fallen. But to answer his question, in life, you're going to meet people who say, if there's not something external to the human mind, and we're going to get into this in morality as well, if there's not something too external to the mind, then it doesn't count. Then it's just me against you, and there's no real standard. So it's just chaos. But you're also going to meet somebody who says, if there is anything to the external mind that applies to all of us, then that's meaningless, because then we just have to do whatever it says. It's just obedience. There's no analysis involved. When you meet somebody from one of those two camps, they're going to think of the other camp as nihilistic. And that's just going to always happen. So people who think that meaning has to come within, they hear about God as the standard, and they're like, nihilism doesn't make sense because you're just obedience, blind obedience. And then if you meet somebody who thinks that you need God and they hear about meaning comes within, they're like, nihilism, because it's just chaos. You versus him versus Roy versus John versus Susie. There's no way out of that. That's just a premise that people carry with them until they don't, whether they take it to the grave or change their mind. So I don't ever try to change anyone's mind. I just say, okay, that's how you see it. I got it. I'll keep living as if there is meaning. And the fact that there's limited existence for me pushes me to try even harder. If at some point I'm going to go away, then I want to try harder until I do go away. Whereas I do understand some people say, well, if I'm going to go away, then I'll just give up. I understand that some people see it that way. I just don't.
Okay, Leroy, we lost you for a second. I told everybody that you rage quit, so I know that. But now you're back. You've calmed down. You got yourself. What do you got to say?
I was thinking of Richard. I mean, I was really listening to his last talk before this one, and I was really rocking with it. It was so interesting. Again, I was doing dishes the other day because I do dishes. I love to wash dishes by hand. There's something about the hot water that just makes me feel really good, right? And I was sitting there thinking to myself about my time in the Marine Corps and in my time in combat. I know I was tripping on it. I was really excited when you said that, Richard.
Leroy was a
And
Marine sniper. I'll tell him. I'll tell you.
and
Hoorah.
I was thinking. There we go. I was thinking about it, and I was again. I said to myself, I had more reason to not be afraid and to be brave. Didn't make me braver than anyone else. I just want to say that because there are guys that are far more braver than I was, but it gave me reason not to be brave. I mean, not to be afraid of dying, not to do stupid stuff either, but not to be afraid to die, which means that I was really free, to live in that environment and to make meaningful decisions and to make meaningful choices. And again, there are other guys, and like I know, Richard, that the one thing about the Marine Corps that we can attest to is that we all get in front of us standards, men who have gone before us, men who have made the ultimate sacrifice, and they are the ones who really define for us, what it means to be a Marine. And any good Marine would say to themselves, I can't be any less than that standard. I mean, I can meet the standard, and I could try to, go further than it if such a thing could happen, but I can't be less than it, because to be less than it is to be something less than what we really are. I mean, and so I was with you on that, but I would also say that at the end of it all, the one great thing about God is, I would say that God is radically sovereign over everything. But I would also say with C.S. Lewis that God has, in his radical sovereignty, has given us the opportunity to be free moral agents in the world in which we live. And it's the ability to make choices that matter, that gives us freedom. Even if we were to argue that those things are bound in heaven, they may be bound in heaven, but guess what? We don't know that they're bound in heaven, right? We don't know what's bound. All we know what's, like you said, right in front of us and what we have to do. And if there really is nothing at the end of it, I just struggled to see how it's not mere preference. I struggle to see how it's just not mere preference. And if it's just only preference, then that makes that all the bravery and all the things that we, who have been in the Marine Corps adore about it, it just makes it okay. I mean, no different than anything else. It doesn't really give it I would say the meaning that we think that it really has, right?
Well, and we could talk about the morality again for our third episode, but I want to say that every human can make a distinction between preferences, opinion on one end and a morality on the other. Even people who say that they don't. If you keep nudging them, you'll find the things that they actually list as more. So it goes for everybody. And again, I think that's that biology that when you're born that says something's going to go in this well. I like to think of it as a well. Now, the content hasn't gone in there yet because I think some of that's going to come from the cultures up here and your sense of creativity and your experiences. But the well exists. And if that well exists biologically, if I was a theist, that's where I would come after me to say, where does that well come from? But that well is there, so to speak. So something's going to go in that moral well, and it's different than preferences and opinions. Whether God exists or not, I absolutely agree that moral well exists at birth. Heck, at inception. I'm not a lib. As soon as you're a person, there's that well is going to be there, even though you can't possibly understand it at the time. That moral well is going to be a part of your life.
So there's Richard's argument for the God-shaped heart, God-shaped hole in everybody's heart. But aside from that, sorry, man, I had to do that to you. If everybody could, because I want to close up here. We will get to the future shows. There's going to be a lot more conversation on these ideas, what gives human dignity and value, and how does this play out in issues like immigration and all these issues around the world. We're going to get there. But if each of you could summarize just in 1 or 2 sentences, 3 sentences, as concisely as you can. Richard, we'll start with you as our guest. What gives life meaning? You're off again. Oh my goodness, you can make a monkey come to the show.
there should be there has to be a punishment now for the episode 2. Then maybe you can do like my daughters can do one of these things on live stream that might put something dumb on my head or something. Maybe we'll do that next time.
I'll see if I can figure that out. I'm gonna have to now. I'm gonna have to find out how to do that.
Yeah, so
right.
This is the third time, and Marine. So of course we have a hard time learning.
Where's the crayons?
Yeah, I know us and crayons. So yeah, you've got as I was saying before, these cultural, moral, and intellectual norms. That's going to give you meaning. You have a biological well that's already part of you, and it's gonna have something put inside of it that's going to come from these clouds that are above us, but also your sense of creativity, because you can come up with something new. So yeah, that cloud, the biology that it's there, it's already a part of you as soon as you're you, and your sense of creativity. That's where you're going to get your meaning, and it's going to be something. Even if your meaning is leave me alone or pleasure, it's going to be there.
All right, Leroy, same question to you to keep it fair. 1, 2, 3 sentences, as short as you can. Where does meaning come from?
I think, as I said, I think that if we distinguish between temporal meaning, I think anybody can give meaning to anything or any aspect of their life. I think on some level, the serial killer can give their life meaning, right? Meaning is being able to kill people. But what gives my life meaning, I would say, is that I have loved God with all my heart, all my soul, and all my mind, and I've loved other people in the same way.
I was going to say the same thing for my closing, pretty much. Meaning is discovering the God who created me with purpose, loving that God, and then learning to love that God, and discovering my purpose. I learned to love other people and do it the way in which I can balance all those things. And I think, honestly, I think Richard makes a great point that we're all created with that innate desire for that. Romans would tell us that very thing. He gave a great summary of Romans. We're all created with the knowledge of God, but we suppress that knowledge of God. And so meaning and purpose come when we don't suppress that knowledge and we discover who he is. Well, gentlemen, I do want to honor your time and the time of everyone else. Appreciate everybody joining us. So thanks again to all of you who are here live. If you want to join us for our next discussion, which will be about a month from now, about atheist ethics and 7 arguments, we are going to explore the question, can atheism answer the problem of selfishness? Something that came up in today's show. So in the meantime, I'd encourage our Christian brothers and sisters to go out and start a conversation with an atheist friend and raise the roof on the meaning of life. Finally, don't forget to follow and rate the show on your favorite podcasting service. And if you want to participate with me in a subscribers-only question and answer, and maybe we can even figure out one where we get all of us involved online with that, you can still sign up through my website, morethancake.org. Take care and God bless.